Hello, everyone. Welcome. Give it just a second here to let everybody join.
Hey, Autumn. Good to know there's a friendly face.
Yeah, that's always nice.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Welcome to CNS Connect webinar series. My name is Amy Smith, and I am the Director of Certifications for the ANA and the BCNS. And today I am joined by Ali Shapiro, who's going to share her expertise on the next generation of health coaching, motivating and guiding clients in sustainable nutrition change. If you're a CNS, you'll earn CE for today's presentation, and I will put a survey in the chat towards the end of the presentation. Just make sure you fill that out and you'll get a certificate. If you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A throughout the presentation. And there'll be some places where there's some interaction, so please make sure you're chatting to everyone and not just the host and the panelists, that where everyone can see your answers. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the presentation. And this is a 90-minute webinar, so usually we go for an hour, but we do have Ali with us for 90 minutes today. It is recorded, so if you have to leave at any point, we will send the recording out after the fact later in the week. So let me tell you a little bit about our presenter. Ali is a 31-year cancer survivor who used functional medicine to resolve her own depression, IBS, and acne that were triggered by her cancer treatments. She got curious about the emotional roots when she felt amazing after reversing all these diagnoses, yet couldn't keep it up. She created her evidence-based, client-proven Truths with Food health coaching framework while at the University of Pennsylvania to address the omnipresent start-stop reality in the nutrition and exercise fields. She's refined it over 15 years as a full-time health coach and now trains others in her BCNS ICF certified trauma-informed truth coaching certification. She has a master's of science from the University of Pennsylvania and did a functional medicine apprenticeship in 2008 to 2012. She has also attended the Institute for Psychology of Eating, Health Coaching, and Continuing Education and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition at Columbia University Teachers College. So welcome, Ali. I will turn it over to you. Let me stop sharing here.
So now I'll just hit share screen. This is the hardest part of the presentation.
Making sure the technology works. Yeah. Awesome. Yep, we can see it. Good.
Great. And Amy, thank you so much for helping me and to organize this. And I am just so excited to be here. I love meeting with other integrative thinkers and people who really understand the power of nutrition because it's changed my life. So like Amy said, we're going to talk about the next generation of health coaching today. And today we're going to go through what is straightforward versus complex change. And I think when I present some of the research, you're probably going to say, oh, this makes sense. And it has some language for perhaps why our clients struggle. We're going to talk about why falling off the wagon makes sense, some of the 4 main stress eating triggers and patterns that I've seen in my 16 years. It'll be in October of full-time health coaching. I want to give you a tool to help clients to start to take more responsibility for identifying their emotional triggers. I'm also going to give you a coaching tool I call the Oreo cookie method that will include some 4 powerful coaching questions to better support clients to implement the life-changing protocols that you can offer them. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. And like Amy said, there's going to be some participation, so the time will go fast. Amy gave my quick bio, and the big personal change impetus behind this is, like she said, I found functional medicine back in 2006. It was a very small, tight-knit group, and back at the time, and it changed my life. And then when I couldn't keep it up during what I would call stressful periods, like when I would go for my scans to make sure I didn't have secondary cancers, and in the cancer world, we call it scanxiety season, which, because our healthcare system is what it is, it would be 6 weeks of booking your appointments, getting your appointments, waiting for the oncologist to say you're clear. And I would find myself binging on sugar. And I was like, oh my God, I know this aggravates my anxiety. I know my IBS acts up. Why am I doing this? And other stressful periods of my life. And so that's what really led me down a really systems orientation to change. So being a CNS, you have such a systems look at the body. And I think this this process will really resonate because it's a holistic form of change. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with Dr. Michelle Seeger's work. She's amazing, but she published this in the American Journal of Health Promotion. And she said there's little research to support the idea that automatic habits can drive lasting change in complex lifestyle behaviors. So if you think about it, if we're trying to get clients to take a vitamin or a supplement, that's pretty straightforward, right? Pair it with your breakfast in the morning. It can be easy to be pretty consistent. But things like exercise and eating, I remember going gluten-free before it was easy to go gluten-free. It's still not 100% easy, but you're in 100 different contexts where you have to be gluten-free. At a restaurant, when you're with your family, whose family traditions are all gluten, right? Maybe you're out with people who are at work and you're like, am I going to look weird at work if I'm the one who's high maintenance, right? There's so many contexts for eating that bring up a lot of uh, emotion and a lot of mental gymnastics in our clients. And she talks about how those of us who have more roles, right? So if you're a caregiver, that includes parenting. If you run your own business, if you have a pet, if you're a homeowner, the more roles, roles, you have in life, the more responsibilities you're going to have. And so the less control over time of your time you have. And so what that really means is less predictability. So this idea of habit hacking and habit stacking, it can work for some things, but it's really challenging when you add, I think, real life in, especially in our world today where it seems we need to constantly be changing. And I think COVID was a really great recent example of that, and how so many people's alcohol use, emotional eating, health metrics got worse in many ways because things were so unpredictable. People were out of the routines and were constantly having to pivot. The other thing that Dr. Seeger brings up is that eating and exercise goals are very emotionally loaded, right? And she talks about them being in their own class of behavior change because they are tied to losing weight. And this is where you, as a CNS, might have people coming to you for SIBO, anxiety, Hashimoto's, all of these things. But because weight and diet culture is the water we swim in, we are bringing this framework of, well, if it is it, I also want to lose weight, or if I'm not being compliant to the authority, which is you, not the diet, right? I'm going to feel shameful. I'm going to feel guilty. There's just so many emotions that make changing our food not straightforward. And I think, again, having worked with clients or going through your own journey, this kind of gives language to probably some of the challenges that you've seen, right? And some of the things that traditional coaching, like know your why, are a great start, but your why changes, right? Day to day. It doesn't mean perhaps you don't still want to eat well, but if you have a work project that is demanding all your attention, and your financial security is a more immediate concern than long-term health implications, it's not that you've lost your why, it's just there's a lot of other whys competing for that. So the TLDR, as the young kids say, is that sustainable healthy food habits are complex, not a straightforward path. And so we're contending with unpredictable circumstances, eating in a lot of different contexts with different pressures. Strong emotions around food and exercise exist, no matter how evolved we think we are. And unfortunately, the default healthy eating definition in our culture is tied to weight loss, not health. And as a CNS, you know that health is so much more than weight. That can sometimes be part of it, but it's not the whole thing. So what we really what the research is pointing to is that sustainability really requires flexibility for our clients and us to support that flexibility, not compliance, right? So I think of as, CNS, as you are giving them this highly individualized what, but how we're actually going to implement that yet is to be determined based on each client's life. So why does falling off the wagon make sense? Now, in a lot of other coaching paradigms, When I've trained other coaches, they feel like, oh, when the client falls off the wagon, I feel like I need to pull another rabbit out of my hat. I need to find another tool, right? Which is in essence trying to help control the client's situation more, right? Control their emotions, control their lives. But what I want us to really think of is how do we get clients to roll with the unpredictability of it? And so, what I've identified in the 16 years of working with clients and in my own journey is that there's four triggers that cause us to fall off the wagon. And they make sense when once you understand the patterns we're going to go over. But as you can see, this is also very clear why it makes sense. So the first one is when we're tired, right? um, yeah, as a business owner, I thought I knew tired until I had a kid. Now I know a whole new level of exhaustion. So often I think of, clients like, oh, I hit Uber Eats again, right? It's like that is the solution to exhaustion and time constraints. A lot of my clients, they're like, I've worked hard all day and I deserve this. I don't want to deserve this, but I need something, right? Throw me a bone. Anxiousness. And really, I think of that as uncertainty coming from the outside world. Again, think of COVID. Think of, we just got, a message, hand, foot, and mouth disease at daycare closing, right? It's like, oh my God, this is not anything it just doesn't have anything to do with my own self-doubt. It's uncertainty. A lot of times clients are like, what is going to change? So I actually have the time and space for my health. And food can be a solution when you need a refuge from the outside chaos. Again, I think we saw this with COVID. It was like, what did you have to look forward to, right? A lot of our routines were disrupted. And so food can be used then. Inadequacy. And I think of this as self-doubt that comes from the inside. So when clients feel like they're not enough or too much. Some of my clients are like, I don't want to pass my disordered eating along to my kids, so they're just going to be able to eat everything. But then they find that that has its own issues, right? It's kind of going to the other end of the extreme. Or I'm too much or not enough with my food and life needs, right? A lot of my clients who are diagnosed with Hashimoto's or SIBO, their family is like not health aware. They're weight aware, but not health aware. And so they can sometimes feel like this is such a burden to ask other people, to change their traditions, etc. But it doesn't just happen with food. It often happens with life as well. And then there's loneliness. And loneliness, the academic definition is when our social needs aren't being met. So people can be around other people, but if their social needs aren't being met, they can feel very lonely. And this happens to a lot of my clients is they feel very separate, even around the people that are their friends or family. And then they go home and eat alone in secret afterwards. But sometimes they feel they need comfort when they feel like they're the only one who is struggling with, some sort of chronic condition. Or my healthy food choices make me feel separate. So what I want you to see is that the falling off the wagon is actually the solution, not the problem. And so we don't need to whip out any more tools around this. We need to go into it. And these triggers come from learned patterns. And this is where I'm gonna get some participation. So the first trigger is tired. And I'm curious if you can share in the chat, and Amy's gonna read off some of the answers. What memories do you have where you were rewarded with food? So think back to school, um, childhood. My school district did this thing called Book It. They partnered with Pizza Hut. And if you read 5 books, you got a pan pizza for free, right? So it became about achieving reading 5 books. Or I remember taking swimming lessons and being afraid to go off the diving board. And my dad was like, I will take you to Dunkin' Donuts if you jump off the diving board, right? And it was like, bam, I overrode that fear and accomplishment. I'm in the water, right? So I think most of us have memories like that. So I don't know if that helped jog anyone's memories.
I forgot about the bucket and the pizza. That's a great always also too, like when you go to the doctor, right? Oh, we'll get you ice cream after the doctor.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring that one up too. Yes, yes.
So let's say Autumn says after a sports game with her team. Jane says did well in school on a test and you would get ice cream. Brandy said, yep, the bucket and pizza was the goal. Suzanne said a special trip to fancy ice cream parlor for a good report card.
Yes, yes, yes. I was totally saying celebrate, right, for the good grades. Yes, I love those. And so what ends up happening is exactly what everyone said and what Autumn said was sports. I remember playing softball, and after every game we would get a Huggy, like you had to either bring Huggy or soda or like Fritos, like Doritos, you know what I mean? Like, oh, and so it begins when, food is used as a reward for hard work or accomplishment in our families, for academics, for sports. Some of my clients, it's for dieting too, right? And so that gets even more tricky, right? So what ends up happening as adults, this tracks with, okay, I need to be productive and accomplishing, right? So being tired, when we feel tired, this we're at risk for not getting enough done, falling behind, and not accomplishing as much or in the ways that I say you because it's important. We were talking about your memories or the clients want, right? So this is where clients start skipping meals. Some of my clients like, I don't have time for lunch. I got to work, and then their blood sugar is dysregulated, and then they need more. It's a hot mess. But it's not that they're undisciplined. It's they're so disciplined with work and they're so driven to accomplish. And the pattern is then I get rewarded once I'm done accomplishing. So also food. This is why people can turn to that Starbucks, caffeine at 3 p.m. or sugar. All right, this overrides my body's need for rest, for proper nutrition temporarily, right? This is where a lot of this, I deserve this eating, right? I read the 5 books. It wasn't about, well, what do you like to read? What's enjoyable? It was like, no, you got to get those 5 books. And this leads to insufficient preparation for food choices a lot of the times, right? So there is this pattern that it starts in childhood and then it tracks to the adult version. And so we're exhausted from productivity and accomplishing stress, is basically how that first pattern starts. Okay, so trigger number 2, anxious, which again is uncertainty. And what memories do you have where food was part of cultural thresholds? So, where there was a transition in life, and food was part of the grounding that was part of that transition, like birthday parties, bat mitzvah, communions, funerals, graduations. So, I would love if some people can share in the chat some memories they had where food was part of a transition.
Tammy brought up a good point. She said, why do we call foods that are considered not good as treats? I'm going to treat myself to a donut. I'm going to treat myself to a
Yes.
cake.
Or have a cheat day, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
cheat day. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And which you earn, right? I've earned the cheat day.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So Amanda says the stress of planning food for funerals. So that's a good one. That's what we comfort people with, right? We bring them food after the funeral. Autumn said church events. Tammy said holidays. That was the only
Yes,
time the family got together and that people made special dishes. Sunday dinners at grandma's.
yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
oh, Autumn mentioned meal trains, which I know is a newer kind of trend. If somebody has a surgery or has a baby, you get them a meal train.
Yes, I love that you brought up the meal trains. I have participated in those. It's again transitional times. Yeah,
Yeah. I think
yeah.
Christine brought up a great point. She said she can't think of any family events that didn't revolve around food. And I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yes, yes. And part of what we're going to get into is this is not inherently bad, right? It's when things become chronic, like we're always tired and accomplishing, right? And we're always treating ourselves. So that's where this gets tricky. And we'll get into, well, what is this like? What is this? I call it moderation is the new radical. This begins when food is used to ground us during transitions. And I love, I forget who it said, it was like every family gathering, right, was about food. And yeah, it connects us to our people, right? And when our food supply was more connected to the earth and the land that we ate, right? So many of these gatherings were about the seasons changing or my family, we used to every other day, my parents were city school teachers and there wasn't a lot of money. So every other Friday was payday. And it was like, we made it, we made it. And we would go to pizza to celebrate. But food has always been part of ceremony, ritual, and routine. And that's a good thing. We need that sense of grounding. But as adults, when transitions bring up uncertainty, they can threaten loss of security. So, food, money, health. I had so many clients, well, actually, two, not so many, but who I had worked with years ago come back to me during COVID because they had grown up with food insecurity and the supply chain issues brought up all of this. Oh my God, is there enough food? All of this old stuff that they thought they had worked through, right? But they were faced with that potential loss again. And so we rely on past food routines and rituals to ground us into our place during transitions. And this can also mean our clients' workplaces, which become oddly like the people we spend the most time with. I remember when I was in the corporate world, it was like I worked in commercial real estate, and the clients would send the brokers like all of this junk food. It was like almost every day there was a reason to be in the break room, right? Eating something that was very unhealthy. But food is a grounding force. And I love this Ayurvedic, um, which is more metaphorical, but it's like food represents mother, it represents earth, right? The quintessential mother archetype is earth. And it feels so grounding to know that you are in sync with the seasons and the food there, right? So we can see how it's become a little distorted, right? I don't think Super Bowl food is quite the same as, harvesting corn and squash, but it comes from these natural impulses. And often this is when we use food to numb out fear and potential loss. And again, I think COVID, the data of how people became so much less healthy during that time, I think speaks to the cultural lack of support we had around transitions. Okay, so trigger number 3 is inadequate. And this is again when self doubt comes from the inside. So, what memories did you have where food provided comfort? And I love that Amy talked about like if you go to the doctor, right? You get a shot or you get some sort of uncomfortable process. Like, do you want a lollipop for that? Right? So it happens in the most benign, normalized ways. And that also brings up one point that I wanted to make is that these patterns, what's sometimes hard about seeing them is it's really about what was normal. I know that trauma is in the collective right now, and that's really great that we have that language. And a lot of this stuff comes from what was just normal everyday stuff. The metaphor I use is it's like the climate that we grew up in, not the weather, specifically stressful events, but just what was normalized. So does anybody have memories of where food provided comfort? I remember the doctors and the dentist, like the doctor maybe, but the dentist, like, not good for your teeth.
That was what somebody had put ice cream after the dentist. And I was thinking, well, that's ironic, huh?
Yeah.
I don't see any new ones, but I think we had several that, before that were.
Yeah.
Oh, Brandy said, I'm a kid of divorce, so we ate while away from my mom. That's a good one that comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you brought that up, Brandy, because you'll find that instability that a lot of people who experience, whether from divorce or dysfunctional sibling dynamics, parental dynamics, really, I mean, this is kind of a little tangent, but as kids, the way that we develop, we make everything about us, right? It's like it's not because we're uniquely, suffer from self-doubt, but it's just a normal developmental process to make everything about you. So that is where a lot of self-doubt can come in with our clients as adults. So again, begins with food use discomfort at the doctor's, when your caregivers bribe you to leave the playground, right? I'll give you a cookie if you leave now. You didn't want to, but you overrode the discomfort because there was food waiting for you. Or doing what you didn't want to do to be a good boy or a good girl, right? With the cookie, cookie is generic. It could be whatever was around. But we get bribed a lot, right? And told that we're good. Through food or to just override the discomfort of what we don't want to do. As adults, inadequacy threatens being seen as bad, right? So, am I doing this perfectly enough for results? I think about the protocols that you probably offer them. My diet is such a burden to others. A lot of my clients feel being a burden to others. And I need to zone out with Netflix and ice cream from messing up, right? With my kid, with work, with the way that phone call ended with my mother, whatever it is, right? And so inadequacy threatens disapproval. And so food becomes a way to, as adults, to be comforted. So last one is the trigger of loneliness. So and we've kind of shared some of these already, but what memories do you have where food connected you to others? And again, that's birthday parties, some people mentioned. Um, I even remember in high school, my friends and I got into the gym and we would joke about diet starts tomorrow. So it was like eating with them and like joking about diet starts tomorrow was also a way that we connected with others. And I think you probably, a lot of you can think about how middle school, high school became a time where, you know, matching our peers become more authoritative than our parents. So that's something to think about. But are there any new memories, Amy, of food connecting you to others? And again, in a very positive way.
I don't. Oh, somebody said that they grew up with a lot of isolation as a child, and food always made them feel better or loved. Um, oh, Tammy said, as a latchkey kid, you'd come home and be home alone. So food was a way of managing loneliness. What came up for me is thinking about clients that have binge eating disorder, and they're often reporting, eating in the closet by themselves, trying to kind of hide. And that I think is always very much tied to loneliness.
Yes, yes. And actually, when I get into like, what do we start to do? That loneliness, I think, is that eating in the closet is such a metaphor of separateness, right? It's like, I often say to clients, like when someone's actively binging, what they fear is coming true has actually come true versus just being worried about it, right? So yeah, that binge eating is definitely this extreme form of separateness. And I love those examples because yeah, I was a latchkey kid and I was bullied in fifth grade, and that's when I came home and ate. Right, like I was like, what else do you do? So, and again, when we're in elementary school and increasingly in middle school and high school, our peers become just as authoritative as our parents. And so we really need that belonging. And if we're cut off from that, it's really, really painful. So food is connection. It begins at birth, right? You know that you are going to be you have two main needs as a child, as a baby, to be touched and fed. So you know that you are connecting if you're fed from family eating norms. A lot of my clients who grew up in tumultuous, chaotic home environments, it was like, oh, well, whenever we were eating, that was the happy time. We would go out to eat, and that was when we just forgot about, the fight that just happened or the financial worries that just happened. And then again, matching dieting patterns. This can happen a lot with kids and their parents, but also with peers. And as adults, loneliness threatens that feeling of being separate. So I'm the only one who struggles with food and health. A lot of my clients, once we start digging into these triggers, oh, I eat to not say the weird thing or the true thing, right? So no one gets me here. So I eat when I'm finally home and I'm alone, which is similar. It's the same pattern, the same relational feeling of separateness that Amy's talking about when people are binging in a closet, right? Loneliness threatens even more separation. So falling off the wagon is an invitation, not something to correct, but it's an invitation into flexible, sustainable solutions. And so if we aren't trying to get people to habit stack, we're trying to help them in unpredictable circumstances. The key to that is flexibility. Okay. And just to give you like a snapshot of developmental psychology, which is what a lot of my background is in, is these past patterns are rooted in a developmental stage where we had to be chosen to belong. I really like Dr. Becky, and she was on Glennon Doyle's We Can Do Hard Things podcast, and she asked them, like, how old were you until you were self-sufficient, right? And their answers were hilarious because they're so funny. But I was like, oh my God, mine wasn't until like I was 22 and graduated from undergrad. Did I have my own job? Could I afford a roof under my head? So if you think about that, like we really needed to be pleasing to our caregivers, to mentors, to our peers, so that we could survive, right? It's really hard to be self-sufficient. And developmentally, as we're in adolescence, kids, we have very binary or black and white, all or nothing ideas of what is good and bad to be. Your prefrontal cortex, which gives you more nuanced discernment, that's not fully grown until you're like, I think 25, 28, I forget the exact age. So some of this is, again, just normal everyday development. And really understanding that the ways that our clients are trying to be good and chosen worked really brilliantly in the past. They're here, they survived, they worked for us, right? We are alive and surviving. And the opportunity in adulthood is to belong to ourselves first. So thinking about, what do I choose? Rather than thinking life is just happening to us, what do I choose here? As an adult with more resources, I think that resources include perspective, and we have more choices, right? I didn't have a paycheck, so I wasn't in charge of, what got bought from the grocery store. I was an 80s kid. Kids didn't really have, my parents were laissez-faire, but I was not the one controlling the food in the household. And so falling off the wagon is an opportunity for learning needs that need to be met, for our clients to be holistically healthy and also be resourced to feel safe to make the healthy choice. So when we focus on needs versus habits, it expands our choices. And I'm going to show you examples of this. And it allows for flexibility, right? And I think of in the CNS world, like blood sugar, right? Like rather than saying to someone, you have to eat, this X, Y, and Z, it's like, okay, what macros keep your blood sugar balanced, right? That's a lot more flexibility than you got to eat this X, Y, and Z at every meal. What choices, not habits, make sense for my holistic health if I'm playing the long game? So flexibility, it does require, it may take a little bit more time, but the important thing is that it's sustainable. Um, and the big thing is many clients don't even know they have needs other than what other people want from them. And again, developmentally, when we are in what's called the socialized mind, which we're all in, most of us, there's never all or nothing, most of us are in until early 20s. Our sense of identity is based on the people around us. That's the way that we develop, because you don't want to come out of early adolescence with no moral code, right? You want to have some idea of what is good and bad. But maybe we have different values than our parents. Maybe our generation knows more, right? So the idea is to start thinking, what do I need here? What do I value? And the question goes from, am I being good, to really, this is what works for me here in this context and feels good. And so just reorienting clients to start to check in with themselves first is a huge, huge developmental step, believe it or not. So this is what I call the Oreo cookie method, and I want to leave you with, and again, I'm going to give you some coaching questions. But the first question is a practice of, why does wanting to make the unhealthy choice make sense? And most people are not asking your clients this. Most of the rhetoric out here is, you got to have it back, you got to have it one enough, you want to have it, you need to want bad enough. That's what it is. And it's about more discipline, more control. And again, in a world where we had complete control over our time, that might be the case, but most 80 to 90% of people do not have that. And so if we as practitioners can say, why does that make sense? It is so reparative for the client. Really, most deeply, it helps to help them repair their self-trust. And you're going to get a lot more generative answers than when people are in guilt and shame. Because the natural reaction is, why am I doing this? What's my problem? What do I have to double down on, right? And that actually puts you in a stress response that doesn't make you very generative or see clearly. So just starting to ask, why does this make sense? Why does falling off the wagon make sense? And I have my clients reflect once they start thinking about, we call it food noise. The New York Times just did a huge thing on food noise, if you're interested, around Ozempic and food noise. But food noise is just like, should I eat this? Should I not? How am I going to manage this? I have to be gluten free. But what if people, all of the mental gymnastics that happen? But they can also start to do it after a bad food choice, after falling off the wagon, because sometimes in the beginning you can only really reflect afterwards, depending on how much shame is in someone's eating habits. But after the fact is great too. It's research. But why does this make sense? Then the second question we want to ask is, what's at the tail end of this? So am I tired? Am I feeling anxious / uncertain? Am I feeling inadequate? Or am I feeling lonely? And sometimes it could be two of them, together. But having them start to get clear on the trigger then gives them the ability to choose differently. Because many people who struggle with food just think they love food too much. They think that they love sugar. They can't be moderate with sugar. I hear that a lot. Um, and the reality is, it's actually some of these triggers and patterns that, if you're into neuroplasticity, right, are just patterns that we go down because we've been going down them for decades. What's at the tail end of this? And that's the gooey part, right? Like, oh, sometimes it can bring up some feelings. And then what needs are asking to be met? And this is where I'm going to give you some coaching questions that you can start to help to get clients clear on what needs need to be met with each trigger so they can start to choose differently than they have in the past. And what happens is, the more we do this as a practice, this facilitates flexibility because their ideas of what is good and bad really start to soften. And what I like about this is, I still love structure. I still love a good plan, but it's flexible structure. So it's not the end extreme of like, I'm giving up and there's nothing, because US CNS says no food is so powerful. Like, if I didn't know about blood sugar, I'd probably still be binging, right? We need that, but there's ways to have flexible structure with our health. So I'm going to give you a cheat sheet for each trigger. And when you see these options, you'll see how needs expand our choices. So when someone is really exhausted, the question I always like to ask them is, what will replenish me? And what I have found recently, because I had my son at 41, and because of my cancer treatments, I went through menopause and postpartum at the same time. I do not recommend it. I was exhausted and I was having insomnia. And my really rigid thing was like, I need more sleep. But it was, my son didn't sleep until he was 2. I was trying to readjust everything based on menopause. And I found this from a woman named Jordan Maney, and there's 7 types of rest. And it was like, oh my God. So I do need rest, but there's more choices than just getting more sleep. And those are physical rest. So passive is sleeping, napping, but active is restorative, right? Yoga, walking, stretching, unlocking some of that stagnation that can happen if you have a desk job, or if you haven't moved a lot. There's mental rest, right? Like, I think sometimes the healthy choice is getting healthier takeout. Usually by Thursday or Friday, we try to only limit takeout to once a week, but it's like, okay, we're getting the healthy tacos. I just can't even think about what to prepare for dinner tonight because I'm spent. Workout classes. Sometimes people, it's like, look, if you don't want to think about how to exercise, go to a workout class and someone will figure it out for you. Walking is easy. Just do that. Sensory rest. This has been huge for me as someone who works on the computer. Connecting cooking to sensory rest has made me want to cook in a whole new way, given me more motivation. Taking 5 minutes away from your kid to breathe, right? That is sensory rest. Unplugging from electronics, movement and silence. Sometimes my clients realize when they need sensory rest, okay, I'm not listening to a podcast. I'm not listening to something I should be learning. I'm just going to have some sensory rest. Then there's creative rest, being in nature, cooking without a recipe. This is something I really love because I realized I do like cooking. I just hate the recipe finding. And most of what I eat is pretty simple. So I know, like, okay, I always have garlic, onion, soup stock, some sort of vegetable. And our clients can get to that place as well. Emotional rest, not having to be on, saying no, and we'll get into that in inadequacy and loneliness. And then there's spiritual rest, right? Nature, community, prayer. Those are all the different types of rest. And what I love about this is you can connect health habits to being energizing versus only being about weight loss. And unhooking from weight loss, right? And having that meaning about everything being about weight loss, it takes time. So it's not like all of a sudden clients are going to be who clients who struggle with weight or have weight on their agenda are going to be like, oh, this is purely about health. But what ends up happening over time as we focus on needs and flexibility is their definition of health expands, right? And not just intellectually, but I'm thinking of like when I had sleep issues, really getting sunshine in the morning, right? It's like I was doing that. There was no weight loss incentive. It was just like, I need to do this for my actual health and sleep. So that's what we want clients to start to connect to is, oh, my healthy choices, including my food choices, can be energizing instead of more exhausting. And that helps with like those really quick wins that adults need. The need cheat sheet for when someone is uncertain. The coaching question I always ask is, what is essential here, right? So if daycare closes, what essentially must happen today? This usually involves me reworking my work schedule and making sure, Essa, my son, is well taken care of. And part of this sub question that I ask clients are, what are your essential health pillars? I think maybe all of us have like three cornerstone needs to resource me so how I want to navigate. You can tell my daycare has closed a lot. That's always my first example. Horrible night's sleep, or just any life curveball, right? One of my clients, she's like, oh, I was going to go shopping and then I had to take my dog to the vet, right? It's like these unpredictable circumstances. And I think everyone's going to have different pillars, but getting our clients to understand what are theirs. Mine is blood sugar, moving my body in some way, and sleep, right? Like everything else doesn't, I can wait for another day. But those are what I have to make sure that I get some in, right? So that is a coaching question that can help you start to get clear with your clients on what they need and help ground them into some sort of structure, right? Because we need structure, we need grounding when things are uncertain, right? So these questions can help provide the boundaries of what is grounding to a client, especially when things are uncertain. Coaching question for inadequacy. So many of my clients, right? They have all of these things that they're like, if they have Hashimoto's, right? They need to be gluten-free. They probably need to be dairy-free. They need to stress less, all this kind of stuff. And they expect, the phrase Rome to be built in a day. So it's like, what are realistic expectations for today, for this current phase that you're in, right? Because if we focus on the most important thing, say is gluten-free, right now, we can get to the other stuff. But what's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck, that's going to give you more energy, more momentum. And so this can be if their inadequacy is coming from eating, from exercising, from the results, right? Because we know healing takes time. For parenting, for work, whatever the stress is, asking what's realistic expectations rather than the perfect or ideal can be really helpful for thinking like, oh, like some, what they need to be focusing on and removing that sense of inadequacy. And what I really like is this connects eating and life success to momentum, not perfection. And this helps people, again, it's not just that they're bringing big emotions because their food changes are tied to weight loss, but they're bringing a whole story of weight loss. And we always hear, you need to be consistent for results. And that's true, but a rigid idea of consistency is doing the same thing every day, which is based on predictable life. I could do that when I was 20 something and didn't have the only responsibilities I had was a job, right? That was so much easier for me back then. But I tell my clients, let's focus on momentum, because then you're like a snowball going down the hill, and you can't even imagine how you're going to feel a month from now. You can't imagine how you're going to feel in 2 months from now. And so we're making incremental steps, but we're focusing on momentum. And they also start to realize that their eating and health choices can make their life easier not harder, because it's, if they're going away for a vacation, okay, you're not going to eat perfectly. But what are those essential pillars? Okay, keep your blood sugar balanced, this or that. How's that going to make your life easier when you return home? Oh, not going to have the vacation blues. I'm not, all of these things that, again, transitions can cause. So being realistic for where they are will help with that sustainability. I always say I am a realist to remain optimistic, realistic to remain optimistic. Then this is the need sheet for loneliness. And believe it or not, I think this is the hardest one to break, because when we feel so separate, um, it's often when someone says they feel separate, it often contains shame within that. That's kind of, they're also describing shame. And so the question is, what can I share with someone I trust to ease feeling so separate? And you, as the coach, as the nutritionist, you may initially be that person. And what's really wonderful about this approach of why does this make sense? They start to trust you. You start to help repair the relationship to authority that told them that they had to earn their goodness, that they were bad, that there were these conditions on being perfect, whatever it was. But you can be that first person. And then often when you meet them with, why does that make sense, right? Compassion, but constructive compassion. It helps them move out into the world in another way. And what clients often need here, as I'm sure anyone who's had a friend or partner try to tell you what to do, it's like very frustrating. They need someone to listen and witness them, not fix and save them. And so often they might say the separateness is usually with food and weight, but it's also always something else. So what I was saying to Amy, binging, usually someone feels like I am separate. Like this isn't, I might be separate. I'll give you an example. I had a client I was working with. She was one of 16 children, big Philadelphia Catholic family she grew up in. And she was going with a couple of her sisters to a concert. And she came home and ate after the concert. She's like, we went out to eat. I was healthy. I did everything. But she goes, I felt so separate there. And I was like, what did you feel separate about? She's like, what's my weight? They don't have to try. It's always, oh, so and so. We'll just say her name, Sarah. That's not her real name. Oh, Sarah is always the one who's struggling with her weight. Now, no one said this, but this is what she's thinking about. And I said, well, why else do you feel separate from them? And she's like, well, I had kids young, and two of my sisters are very career oriented women, and that's fine. But I'm really happy with my choices. I don't care that I don't have the big fancy house. And, she's like, I'm glad I had a family young and, became a teacher and all these kind of things. So that was this. I share that because it's not, the weight becomes a container for these other ways that people feel separate. And so our work together, I said to her, I said, what if you just call them up and share that with them? Or next time you're together, when does it feel like it makes sense? And she had the conversation with them. And of course, none of them were thinking that, but her being able to be witnessed and listen, and then being like, we love you, Sarah. We don't care what you do, was just the what she needed, right? To feel actually connected to them. So she was around them, but she felt separate from them. And I love this because I think being healthy is truly satisfying, but there is such this weight loss restriction narrative that health is, I mean, we've come a long way. When I was, giving up dieting 20 something years ago, I thought healthy was bean sprouts and tofu. We've come a long way, but there is still this story of restriction. And so clients can start to connect to healthy choices being satisfying. And of course, that satisfaction shifts over changes. Taste buds change as you get more energy, as you see the results. So again, just to repeat, the Oreo cookie method is the first step in helping people to get into flexibility, not more control over their lives. But if you figure out how to get more control over people's lives and life, let me know. I'd be definitely interested. I'm sure Oprah would be too, for her favorite things. But 3 parts. We're starting to repair self-trust. I can trust this instinct to fall off the wagon, that I can trust that it makes sense. The gooey middle. Where am I feeling some sort of vulnerability, right? Or some sort of discomfort? What's at the tail end of my food noise? And I will tell you, This is so powerful. So many of my clients cannot believe how often tired comes up. It's like, I can't even believe that this is so much of a driver. I thought it was just this amorphous stress, right? But now I see that it's tired. Oh, I have options, right? It's so amazing for them to see that. Self-belief. What do I need here? And how can I comfortably stretch myself to get this need met? So we're also building resilience here, which is really important for health. Again, comfortably stretch. If you're familiar with nervous system language, titrating, right? We don't want them to go to all and have that backfire. That keeps in the all or nothing. We want small is profound, and it feels manageable and doable. And so over time, clients really learn and discover the power of flexibility. And they start learning part of flexibility is being creative in your thinking, not being in black and white thinking. So the more they do this, the more resourceful they become in the pivot of their lives and their food. Okay, so Q&A. That was kind of a lot, but hopefully.
There's one question so far. So Autumn asked, what's a good way to bring up evaluating clients' needs versus habits when it comes to our existing clients when we haven't been talking about that previously?
Yeah. So I think it's if clients are struggling, right? If it's like this question actually came up with some other health coaches I was training, and you can meet clients where their need is, right? So if clients are, sometimes if you're first starting with them or you're a little bit into working with them, you can say, so I know changing your eating habits is hard. Like I always tell my clients, it took me 9 months to go gluten free because I kept binging on like sugar and stuff. This was like, I was still stuck in diet culture. But you can say like, I know this isn't going to be it may not be an easy lift. So if you're struggling, let me know. I can support you through that because it's going to take some time. It's a process. And I find that that's an invitation and also makes them feel safe, right? Of like, okay, I don't have to white knuckle, like going out and doing everything all at once. It's like, okay, I'm in this for the long game. So does that answer sufficiently, Autumn, or do you want to talk more about it specific?
She says, sure.
Sure. Which way?
Here, Autumn, let me unmute you and then you can. Oh no, she said she got you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think just bringing it up is hugely relieving. And it was interesting. I trained a bunch of other health coaches who they work in more like the doctor does the functional medicine process, and then the health coaches, um, the health coaches help just kind of they're kind of accountability partners right now. They're trying to transition to more, holistic support. But a couple of the health coaches were saying that they got reassigned, um, like it wasn't to knock the other health coaches, but they said, I felt so much shame that I couldn't keep this up that I just stopped coming to the health coaching meetings. Right. And so sometimes, but once I said, no, this like, let's help, let's work through this. It's like, oh, the people kept coming up and kept returning to the health coaching once they were like, no, let me help you, all that stuff. So I think because so many people are entrenched in this diet culture, weight loss, um, not to throw Jillian Michaels under the bus, but it was like, that's what people are like used to, like, oh my God, right? That's the template, right? Of like, this is an authority who I have to be good for. And if not, I'm going to be punished and I'm already struggling. So I think when you can, bring up the conversation in a call, it is going to be really welcome. And you might find, even more compliance, but a different kind of compliance, right?
Hannah brought up a good point. She said, I have so many clients that feel like they can't come back until they've made the changes that we discussed last time. And I think that's true. People start canceling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up, Hannah, because I say to my clients, I say, you're going to mess up. You're not going to do this well. And that is the point. like, like really what this bigger process is about is how do we relate to ourselves when we're in process, when we're struggling, right? When we can't do it perfectly. And that's part of flexibility.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, Tammy asked, I have a client that I've been working with for a while with IBSC. This client is stuck in an all or nothing frame of mind. Client is aware of this, but we haven't figured out how to help her break free of that mindset. How would you approach this client? By the way, the client sent me a message saying that they were overwhelmed, not able to do their protocol, and rescheduled for a month later.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, so I had IBS, so I know this, and I know it's so much of the emotional stuff. So how would I approach this client? So this is a little bit, let me think how, um, so I would ask her, what she thinks it means about her if she's doing it all. And what positive judgments does she have of herself when she's doing it all? And what positive judgments does she, or what negative judgments does she have when she's in nothing, right? Like falling, and it's probably going to be perfection or not. Because the next layer of this, which is is the protective resistance of flexibility, right? Which is kind of like step 2 of this is first orienting clients. This is what you need to do. But that's what I would start with is like, what does she think it doesn't mean about her when she's not doing it perfectly, or complying perfectly? And she's going to say, I mean, can you tell me what you think she might say?
Here,
Like,
Tammy, I can hold on, Tammy, I'll unmute you.
because what we're trying to do is get clear on what is overwhelm, what trigger is in the overwhelm, right? Because people say that when they're not clear on what's actually happening, which is part of the overwhelm.
Hi. Yeah. With this client, I've been working with her for months, and this has come up several times in our sessions of the all or nothing. And this client has noted even friends have made comments to her about anything she does, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
So we've had conversations. I'm like, well, tell me what that means for you when you're not doing, like, if you're not able to do 100%, how does that feel to you? And it's very emotional for her. And I can tell that there's something deeper that's connected to the all or nothing. And so I feel like and I've been trying to work with her doing like the 80-20 idea. Well, it's okay if you don't do it 100%. But she wants to. She feels like she has to. And I'm trying to help her break that mindset of, no, you don't have to.
Yeah. So do you want, I mean, is it okay if I go a little bit beyond what we're talking about here to explain what's happening?
Please.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, developmentally, remember when I said when we're in early adolescence, we have these binary ideas of good and bad. So those good and bad are basically an anxiety management system contained of a bunch of stories that all of us have. We all think we're logical, but we're not. Our logic is formed by emotions. And so if anyone is all or nothing, what they're really saying is, here's how I've gotten approval, and here's how I've gotten disapproval. And is like, here's what I've been rewarded for, and here's what I've been dinged for. So logically, you trying to say like, well, 80-20, you don't have to. She's like, yeah, I get that intellectually, but logically, I have been dinged for not doing everything all the way, or I've been overly rewarded for it. So her anxiety management system, which is all emotionally driven, is in very much a binary of what is good and bad. So she's probably been dinged for imperfection, or when things were really, or had a lot of lack of like safety, both physical or psychological safety, when things were out of control in her past. And I don't know if that tracks with what you know about her or whatnot, but it's actually like a deeper process than the Oreo cookie about that. I wish, but I'm trying to think of, I think asking her have you asked like what's hard about, I would ask her both questions, like what's hard about doing it all the way and what's hard about not doing it all the way, and see if some of these triggers come out, and maybe asking it a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, I get the sense from her that in her, because I'm the whole, I should probably say parents are the reason for therapy. Um, I get the sense that she probably got overly praised when she was spot on of doing things. Because in previous conversations, she's like, when I did my diet really perfect, when I did this really perfect, and I was really into, I had a perfect routine. I'm like, okay, well, what changed? Well, I got married and now there's kids. And I'm like, okay, well, things have changed. We need to meet you where you're at. So I feel like she's still struggling with that. Her life has changed. So what you talk about with the flexibility. And I feel like the reason why her IBS came back is because there's that anxiety of not being able to do the perfect. So
Yeah. Well, and this is what they call in we talk about this in my certification is like when I talked about having to adult and belong to yourself first, it's like, okay, you've been rewarded. And again, her identity, because, and this happens to all of us, it's not like unique to her, but our identity feels like it's cohesive in relation to what we were rewarded for and dinged for, right, in early adulthood. And really, it will work really well until we have what's called optimal conflict. Food is an optimal conflict. IBS is an optimal conflict. It's an invitation into, okay, this way of orienting towards having to rely on praise is not working for me anymore. So it's starting to develop different values. And I know I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole, but this is like, I know what's going on. Like, but it's a longer process of her having to figure out, here's what I want to try for me. Here's what I want to recognize for myself. Um, and it's complicated. It's complicated, especially if someone is like always been rewarded for praise. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, we all have been to a degree, but it's kind of when clients say, I have to learn to do it for myself. Have you heard clients say like that's ultimately, I think, what she has to learn to do, and she has to learn that it's safe and like imperfection can be safe. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's like the all or nothing. One thing also that I'll offer, and again, this is out of the scope of this, but the protective resistance, there's three patterns that I work on with clients, and I have a quiz that you can take to learn more about them, but they're compete, avoid, and accommodate. And it sounds like what she's doing is to keep herself safe. Like when you're in the compete pattern, you're always looking at things of like, am I ahead or am I behind? Am I winning or losing? And that rests on this belief around scarcity, which our culture has real scarcity, but then there's also perceived scarcity. And I don't know if I'm getting too down a rabbit hole right now, but it sounds like she's in the avoid pattern with her stuff. Like, I'm going to schedule in a month. I'm overwhelmed. And the avoid pattern rests on like being out of control is unsafe. This belief of being out of control is unsafe. So you either do everything perfectly where you're in control, or, where when things are out of control, they feel unsafe. And so the big fear with people who avoid is being wrong. And I wonder if there's certain ways that you can experiment with her of showing her how there's no right or wrong, with within your doing, and sometimes again, focusing on needs opens up some of that. Well, IBS C does really well if you have, she probably, again, I don't know her whole story, but she might think exercise only counts around calories if she's a perfectionist and gotten praise for, I don't know, for things, versus saying, okay, well, if we do movement, right, let's tie this movement to something more immediate relief. So she can start to realize like, oh, I just walked for, I don't know, 15 minutes, but I didn't have, heartburn after my meal or something like that. So setting up some sort of experiments for her to see the value of 10 or 20% effort. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know if I lost you without giving more context.
So saying all my health clients' movement conversations is focused on reducing stress, supporting nervous system, and aiding digestion. So that's great, right? Like another alternative to what we're trying to get them to do in movement.
Yeah, because my background is also in adult learning, and adults need to feel pretty quick results. Not necessarily like, okay, my IBS-C is gone, but incremental results so that they stick with it. Otherwise, the other competing commitments they have in their life overtake them. So that's part of how health education, a lot of health education isn't formatted for how adults actually learn and change.
That's all the questions I have now.
Okay, any more? Okay.
Oh, actually, hold on. Tammy says she has another client, so let me unmute her. I just unmuted
Maybe
her.
I can help be more helpful with this.
Sorry, I don't want to take up like everyone else's space on this, but I do have another client. I have quite a few older clients that are very challenging. I have a male client, 70, with with SIBO, methane overgrowth, over 20 years of digestive issues, does not have a gallbladder. Of course, no one ever explained to him or anyone else that I have clients about what a gallbladder does for digestion. So with this particular client, I'm struggling with in terms of helping them to eat foods that will reduce symptoms. Because we know with SIBO, it's like food is just about reducing the symptoms. And I'm getting messages. I mean, this client will constantly message me about, I'm still having pain. Nothing is working. I'm so frustrated. Doesn't want to work with the doctor that referred this client to me anymore. And I'm finding in my sessions with my client now that I'm trying to tap into the anxiety that's now developed, which I now feel is now developing into disordered eating around food. So the client will message me saying, well, I'll have a treat because I feel like I need it because everything's getting taken away from me. And so they'll eat something that's got a lot of sugar and has everything in it that's feeding bacteria. So with this client, I'm trying to figure out how to bring the ability to coach this person better so that they can understand that the choices that they're making are affecting the progress of clearing out that bacteria, but also understanding that they need to eat, because now there's times that they're just afraid to eat because when they have when they do eat stuff that will affect them, they will be up all night long with severe pains and they're not sleeping. And then because of not sleeping, I'm sure as we all know, the next day they're tired and they're like, I can't make any good choices now. So I'm like racking my brain, and I'm grateful that this client trusts me because they've sent me messages saying that they trust me more than they do that doctor. But I really feel committed to helping this client make choices, flexible choices that they feel is supportive of them now and for tomorrow. But I'm like, I don't know what to say to this person now. I'm like, I'm trying everything. And it's breaking through I feel like this client is at the point now where they just feel nothing's going to work at all. And this is what they have to live with for the rest of their life.
Yeah. So I thought of something for your other client too. That's an easier question to ask. So I want to circle back to that. So what is the question then with this client?
With this client, the male client, I did try to ask questions about what their food relationship story was, like what was food like growing up, to see if there was some sort of indication that food was more like it was a happy time, or was it a stressful time, because there was some indication of some family stress that was involved, but they denied anything like that. This person also uses language that I tend to see in people who have orthorexic type behaviors.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to figure out how to bring this person out of that perfection eating and thinking that because they also decided to go vegan because supposedly it's healthier. So I'm trying to re-educate this person on how to feed their body, on top of trying to help them eat foods that won't trigger the bacteria to produce those SIBO symptoms. So I feel like I'm doing like multiple things with this client to try to get the SIBO under control, but also helping them to feel like food can be safe.
Yeah. So I think that with this and your other client, I think it's interesting. This client, that man, though, you can tell he's defining perfection as more and more restriction, right? Because if he's now cut out meat, right? It sounds like that's how he's defining perfection, right?
Yeah, he defines because there have been sessions where he talks about eating a meal that would be deemed quote unquote healthy, but then it's a trigger, that meal triggered his symptoms because he ate too much of it.
Yeah.
And then he'll bring in a food, like he'll have some pastry treat and then say, well, I did bad on that one too, and it caused me this problem. So I feel like what he's saying to me, it doesn't matter what he eats anymore. His body's just going to have pain because of it. So, but he still, we have in our sessions, he'll use language about, food basically having morals, it's good or bad, or this or that. And I'm just like, whoa, okay, hold on.
Yeah. I think for both of them, this and the other client with the IBS-C, I think starting with, why does wanting to be perfect make sense?
Okay, so why wanting to be perfect? Okay.
Yeah, like why does this make sense that you want to do this all perfectly? Or why does it with the IBS-C client, I would start there. Or and then why would it make sense that you think you have to do this perfectly with the IBS-C client? And then the male client, it might be like, why does it make sense that you think food is moral? Because I think that starts to open up, like, again, right? And start to unpack some of those definitions. Because it sounds like he's eating the pastry or whatever because of the restriction, right? Which we know.
Right. Yeah.
And the thing that I would look at, and this is again like a relational, like further down, but I would ask him, like, if you do have to cut back food wise for a little bit, right? I think of restriction holistically, right? So like a client will ask me like, well, I used to be able to be gluten-free and now I have 3 kids and I can't seem to stick to gluten-free and I still need to be gluten-free. What changed? And I'm like, well, you had a lot more choices before you had kids, right? So you're being holistically restricted now, right? It's not just about food, but it's like your time is restricted. You're like, a lot of your freedom and autonomy is being restricted. So what we did with her was like, what other like expansive things do you want to be doing that are non-food related that give you more choice in your life? Because that's more holistic satisfaction. Does that make sense? Like looking at restriction holistically. So like this guy, what else does he want to be doing lifestyle wise that maybe would give him the same satisfaction that is just not food?
Yeah, that is a conversation that we had recently.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So with this client, I'm working with him on adjusting his workouts because he's not eating enough to be able to sustain the level of the intensity of the workouts that he's doing. So I'm introducing him to yin yoga and other more restorative, relaxing, that he does have anxiety issues, was on medication for that. So we've had conversations around anxiety and how anxiety, the gut-brain connection, talking about meditation, breath work, vagal toning. We talked about just going for a walk with his partner, doing other things that can support the nervous system, support the body holistically, like every bit of it, as well as like instead of doing a workout because he wants to make that motility happen in his digestion, I'm offering, well, let's do a workout to relax the body so it can digest.
Yeah. 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 And I love that. Yeah. And I'm also wondering, like, because if he thinks food is moral and good and bad, and it sounds like he thinks restriction is moral and good, like when we're in the all or nothing, we're relating to life the same way. Like the way that we relate to food is the way we relate to life. So the same values that he's bringing to food, he's bringing to his life. So I also wonder if there's things that feel like, I just want to do them, not because I have to restrict them, but just because they're fun to be fun. Like even outside of health. Does that like my client who was struggling with gluten-free, she was like, all right, it's going to be a thing, but I haven't seen my friends. And like her looking forward to that helped like her want to make the healthy choices, right? She's like, oh, like, because she had more choice in her life. So I wonder if there's like ways that he's restricting himself.
Yes. Yes.
That is outside that he could just like, okay, do this fun thing because you do have to cut back on your pastries, right?
Yeah. One of the things we recently talked about was he wants to be able to go out with his husband and eat at a restaurant. So we talked about, well, how can you do that?
Yes.
How can you do that? So we talked about different options for food. Turns out he is eating some meat. And we talked about eating steak, a really well-made steak. I said, what if that was the treat that you and your husband do? You go out, you find that restaurant that makes the most amazing steak. You go to that restaurant, you have that steak, and then choose those vegetables for the side that you do well with, and have that a really amazing dinner with your husband. And he was like, yeah, we can try that. Because I was feeling like, okay, if I could create more positive environments with food, then I'm hoping that will reduce his anxiety around food and help him to realize that the handcuffs that he's wearing are the ones that he put on himself.
I know. I think that's why the makes sense, like asking, why does this make sense? Why it all of a sudden takes someone out of like the struggle. And it's like, wait, like, and again, my clients will say, this seems crazy, but I'm like, why does it make sense? Why does it make and it's like, oh, and then you're able to start to unfurl and unpack like the real need that is there. But they have to feel safe to like explore it.
Yeah.
I love that you can see he did that for himself. There's something going on around, I mean, more for sure, of morality. I mean, it's very, yeah.
Yeah. I do feel like there might be some other underlining things regarding morality, and he's just projecting it onto food and other things.
Oh, yeah.
So I feel like this was just one of those things that if I eat like this, then I'm a moral person.
Totally. Well,
and considering he's a gay man, that's part of my thought is like, I'm wondering if that, and he was around during the 70s and 80s when we all know what happened then and how things were perceived then. So I haven't tapped into that with him because I've been waiting for him to show a window of opportunity for us to have that conversation.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that is sort of something that might be underneath that, around his value, his morality with food, and feeling like food has morals. And if he eats a certain way, then he's a better person and has worth, has value, has morals.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up because in developmental psychology, like the four main areas that feel authoritative of people who are defining who's moral or not are your caregivers, it's your peers, it's your work, and it's also church. And I did not grow up particularly religious. And so I was like, church is not something I'm influenced by, but all of us in America and North America are influenced by the Puritans and Protestantism. I have such a hard time saying that. And I'd highly recommend in season 13 of my podcast, episode 3, I had Ann Helen Peterson on. And we talked about how even if you're not religious, even if whatnot, this idea that you have to earn goodness and that being disciplined around food and exercise, how that makes one feel moral and chosen. Even if you're not religious, it's just it overlaps in so many other social structures, like meritocracy. Like if you're working hard, you will have upward mobility. Like it's the process. I'm going off on a tangent, but you're hot on the trails. You're exactly right, is what I'm saying. But that podcast episode will probably connect some dots for you of like, oh, this is totally what's happening.
Awesome.
You know?
I'm gonna
Yeah.
listen to that. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I love these conversations because I love doing this work because it's so much deeper than food. It's this like overall relational way to life that is causing him restriction of like, he probably has a very narrow idea of what is moral and good. And there's lots of ways to be, moral and quote unquote good. So yeah, but I would start with both of them. It's like, why does this perfectionism make sense? Or with the one client who's like, I'm going to schedule in a month, I might follow up with an email and say like, why does it make sense to avoid this, when you're overwhelmed, and again, just keeping asking why it makes sense is like, it reorients people rather than thinking it's a problem.
All right, Allie, we have another question in the chat.
Yeah.
Suzanne is asking, how do you help someone who is stuck and struggling to feed herself with a long history of diet culture and restriction, and says the root is her marriage, but she quit therapy and doesn't want to address the situation? I've tried practical solutions that work for a short time, but the root cause is never addressed, so it feels like we aren't making any major shifts. How can I help her in a more meaningful way?
Yeah. Oh, you guys have a lot of avoid clients. The protection strategy that I would ask her, why does it make sense that you quit therapy and don't want to address the problem? Like, or some, again, why does that make sense? Right. And she might say, I hate conflict, or that would, she might just shut down. But it sounds like she's again that in that avoid pattern, which is actually a psychological. If I feel like things are wrong, this is how I protect myself, is I just avoid. I don't want to make waves. And again, that big fear is like making the wrong choice, and believing that there is a wrong choice. And how we get stuck in all or nothing is we basically have perfection or catastrophizing. And so you'll probably find that why it makes sense is she's catastrophizing what's going to happen. And I wonder if the therapist got a little bit too hit the nail too on the head. Is that, like kind of hit this is, you have to take action. And that was like too scary. So I think asking why does it make sense is just, it starts to repair the self-trust with themselves. Yeah.
That makes me think of the question spiral, like why, and then but why, and then just keep asking, no
Yeah.
matter why, like to really get deep into what the thought process is behind it.
Yeah. I love all these questions. These are kind of the second layer of flexibility, is like the resistance to flexibility, which is the all or nothing, ending with the therapist, not wanting to do the marriage, like all this stuff that on the surface is like, why are you doing that? But like, I think of like, I hate conflict too. And I never thought of myself as someone who avoids, but my husband and I made this like great relationship until my son came. And then it was like, oh my God, there's like, so much conflict. And it's like, I find myself avoiding, and I'm like, just say something. And I'm like, but I'm so ready to be shut down, right? Because of my own past and stuff. So I love that all of you are having so much patience and trying so many different angles like that. That is, that's why your clients trust you so much. And I think just always looking at even the most insane stuff that logically doesn't make sense, there is an emotional story. In my certification, one of the lessons is just on development. And it's like, we all think we're logical, but we're all trying to meander an emotional elephant. Like, it's like the logic part is this little person, and it's like, no, you're going over there. No, you're going over there. And so it's just humbling. We're all like, basically have this like, here's what you've been rewarded for, here's what you've been dinged for. And these are the patterns, not necessarily specific behaviors, but ways of relating. So I'm just going to avoid, I'm just going to restrict further, that have worked for people, but then they stop working. So.
Well, I think that's all the questions, Allie. If you want to tell everyone a little bit about your certification.
Yeah. I'll summarize after I talk about that. But yeah, so I hope I didn't confuse people more, but I was kind of going into the second layer of flexibility. And so yeah, I run the Truce coaching certification, and it's on complex change. It's for change agents who want to really up-level their confidence, impact, in business. And part of some of these questions are sometimes clients don't know how deep food issues go, right? So it can be like, what? This is coming out of left field. But if you have this kind of training behind you, you can it's almost like people come to you to have those conversations. And so the registration opens September 19th. And I'm going to send out an email tomorrow. If you're interested in some of the events around it, you can get on the email list for it. September 19th is a Tuesday. I'm going to do a presentation on the structure when atomic habits implode, the structure of complex change. The following week, September 26th, there will be an event around walking your talk, the business case for personal development. In the certification, you go through a really complex change process yourself. Some people bring food stuff, a lot of people bring their business stuff, so that you can really get a sense of what the process is like and have been in it, so that you know what your clients are going through. And then on October 3rd is an alumni open house to meet with people who have gone through the certification, answer questions, and also see the signature programs that they've made. So it's called the Truce Coaching Certification because you can take this structure of change and the personal development that comes through and bring your own existing skills and talents and gifts and create your own program. I'm Dr. Kirsten Kessler, who is a CNS. She's also a naturopath physician. She's also someone who's been sober for a couple of years. She created her Swell program, and it is a program that physically supports people who are a couple years into sobriety, and then also, have ongoing emotional stuff to work through. So that's an example of, using this structure of complex change to make your own program. And we have a lot of other people some people are trainers and they bring people into this deeper work through training. But overall, the program is trauma informed. It's ICF certified. So if you are an existing coach through the International Coaching Federation, there's 40 CEs. It's also certified through BCNS for 20 CEs, which is probably very pertinent here. 20 professional development CEs, and then 20 professional activities. And the certification opens once a year. It's 10 months. So like I said, you go through the process yourself. You work in practice pods. We record the practice pods. So we do a lot of mentoring. And I'm a big believer in there's no one right way to coach. So when we record the practice pods that you're in, we all say, we go around and say, oh, I would maybe ask this question, or I would have done this way. So you really get this felt sense of, oh, there is no right or wrong way to coach. It increases your confidence in having these more deep, challenging conversations. And really, it eliminates shiny object tool syndrome because you're getting the entire blueprint of complex change, right? The change that isn't so straightforward. A lot of personal development, and it can really simplify your business while increasing your impact, ease, and revenue. This process meets clients exactly where they are. So you're not trying to put them where they want to be, where someone else is. And so it's really great for groups. So if you're getting a little burnt, I got burnt out on one-on-one work because, you hit a ceiling of how many people you can see, how much money you can make. This process really scales to groups. So that's the Truce coaching, details. There's a program page there. I'll send a link to tomorrow with a lot more details. And of course, if you have any questions, my Insatiable podcast, like I was saying, that has a lot of great stuff. Season 13, which is Food is Safety, is the one. Episode 3 is the one I mentioned, but the whole season is really great. And then also season 10, Truce with Food, is really wonderful and almost a structure of complex change, pieces of that. I'm on Instagram. You can email me if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. And then once a month, I host a free Change Agent Disruption Hour call. And in September, we won't be having it because it'll be all around the Truce certification, but we will resume in October. So if you're practicing with this and you have questions or you have your own questions like we chatted today, you can come to those calls. They're on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. and I can help troubleshoot stuff for you there. So just a quick summary, falling off the wagon makes sense. And I think what we, fleshed out in the Q&A, whenever people are doing these things that we're like, they need to change that, let's start with, why does it make sense? Why does perfectionism make sense? Why does it make sense to avoid when you feel overwhelmed, right? It just turns a different part of the brain on someone, the more generative part. Falling off the wagon is the solution, not the problem to feeling tired, uncertain, inadequate, and lonely. And this stress is an opportunity to learn how to unlearn rigid ideas of good and bad, right? What's moral and not, very rigid ideas of that. Good being perfect, bad being imperfect. That's another good, bad. And learn flexibility to eating well for living your best life, not only weight loss. And then the Oreo cookie method for sustainable health change. Again, just repeating, why does this make sense? Whatever is frustrating, whatever obstacles in the way, why does this make sense? What's at the tail end of this? And what do you need as to feel more supported in it rather than more restricted and on your own is the gist of it. So
Thank you. So questions. They want to know if they can have a copy of the slides. And so that's
yes.
up to you. Okay. If you want to send them to me, I can send them out with the video.
Yeah.
And then Susanna's asking Tuesday at 2 p.m. what time zone?
Eastern Standard Time. Yes, great question.
And then Tina's just shared how the webinar was really great. She loved it and probably needed to hear the information personally as much as her clients. So I think that's probably true of most of us. So
yeah. Well, and that's, I love that she said that, because a lot of time, I mean, I've struggled with food, so I understand, but some people haven't. So it can sometimes be like, why are they struggling? So this, when we know our own thing that is hard for us and we can practice with this, we can really trust in it. So I totally get it.
Thank you so much, Allie. And I will send out the recording and the slides tomorrow. And I think Allie's going to follow up with some more information about her program. So just let her know if you have any questions. And thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. I really appreciate it.
I love it. I love the questions and everything.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. And I put the link to let me put it one more time just in case, to the CE survey in the chat. And if there are upcoming webinars, so make sure to check that out. Sorry, I should have done that while we were talking. There's that one more time. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Thank you for coming. Bye.